Thank you all for joining us. This is the sort of final installment of our Climate Year speaker series. And on behalf of the Climate and Sustainability Working Group, soon to be Office of Climate and Sustainability, plus the Environmental Collaboratory staff, want to thank everybody for coming. So we have spent 2021 celebrating, supporting, and cataloging the ongoing climate work that is happening at Drexel and the Academy of Natural Sciences, as well as launching new initiatives to make combating climate change central to our institutional practices, curriculum, our research, and civic engagement. And so one of those initiatives has been this Climate Year speaker series, which before we got started, Corinne and I were just saying, like, this has been one of the funnest parts of Climate Year for us to have these gatherings. We've been highlighting the ways that our faculty, staff, and students at both Drexel and the Academy side are engaging with climate issues. So we've looked at climate through lenses of transportation, water, public health. We've considered what is needed to fully address the climate crisis. We've talked about initiatives here on campus, and we heard from recent Drexel graduates who are integrating a commitment to address climate change into our careers. And we also had a session on the recent COP events. So today we're especially thrilled to have students take the lead. We're going to be hearing from Ellie Kenner's Cities and Climate Change fall term class as they present the work that they did this term to create their Global Council of Climate Leaders. So on behalf of the Climate and Sustainability team, I want to thank Ellie and the students for stepping up to share their work. And I want to invite everyone here on the call to connect with us going forward to share and connect with us around the creative engagement ideas that you have that you think that we might be able to support. So as I said, we're wrapping up Climate Year now, but all of the work that everyone has supported in the past year is not going away. We're about to launch the Office of Climate and Sustainability. We're launching the Environmental Collaboratory, and 2022 is going to be Water Year. And we'd love to keep working with all of you on these initiatives. Many folks here already know who the team are. And if you are not on our email list and would like to be, just shoot us an email to our team email, which is sustainability@drexel.edu. Pretty easy to remember. We will put you on that list. And you'll get invitations to stuff like this, as well as other bits of information. Before I hand it over to Ellie, I wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge that the space we're doing this work in is one that we love and appreciate, but which was never ceded by its original inhabitants. I'm going to just read a passage that we have been sharing at our Climate Year events, provided from the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation. The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape called Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed west and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of Lenape people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. So thanks everybody for being here today. And I'm gonna hand things over to Ellie Kenner now. Ellie Kenner is an associate professor of politics and a faculty member in the Center for Science, Technology, and Society here at Drexel. Her first book, Breathtaking: Asthma Care in a Time of Climate Change, documents the US asthma epidemic in different settings. From 2014 to 2020, she led the sorry, my screen just went bonkers.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. It went to full screen all of a sudden. where was I? From 2014 to 2020, she led the Philadelphia Health and Environment Ethnography Lab, which facilitated collaborative projects between Drexel students, governmental and non-governmental partners, and community organizations. This included the public education project, Climate Ready Philly. Her latest research, the Energy Rights Project, looks at how organizations address energy vulnerability in the US Mid-Atlantic region. Ellie and students, please take it away.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. Okay, can you see the slides? Great, okay. So thank you, Jen, and also thank you to the Climate Year Speaker Series Organizing Committee. It's such a gift to be able to share and discuss our work, and I'm very grateful for the opportunity for our class to report out on the climate projects that we did this year, or this quarter rather. And my approach to teaching is rooted in critical pedagogy and my desire to get people to think more expansively about their lives in our broader society. And I was trained in this pedagogical tradition, which was established by Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian educator and scholar. And I was trained in this pedagogical tradition from the moment I started teaching back in 2003. And since then, I've continued to actively learn about innovations in critical pedagogy, primarily in art and also in my field of science and technology studies. And in a later case, I've sometimes contributed to these innovations in my own classrooms. So critical pedagogy tells us to teach from students' lived experiences and their interests. It tells us to make sure learning is process-oriented and problem-posing. And I take this to mean that students should leave this course with new skills that can help them engage with critical issues like climate change, but also everyday ones that are often overlooked. And this includes civic practices like how to design and facilitate a meeting equitably, how to put together a portfolio that highlights student scholarship, analytic skills, and creative work. Critical pedagogy also encourages students to dream of a better future and to start imagining what that looks like, what it feels like, and what it sounds like in course activities like the Global Council of Climate Leaders, which is one of 2 pedagogical experiments that I ran this quarter. So the second pedagogical experiment was using a learning record method of assessment. And this actually isn't an experiment at all. The learning record is a highly impactful evidence-based assessment methodology, but this quarter was my first time using it. And the learning record is the student's portfolio of their coursework and also their analysis of their learning. And it's a style of self-rating where the assessment rubric comes from course, but also personal learning goals, which are crafted at the beginning of the quarter by students. It's also assessed by a rubric called the 6 Dimensions of Learning. And as you can see here, we assess learning in this course far beyond conventions of content-based knowledge acquisition. The reason I'm mentioning this here in this presentation is because the students have very creatively used the 6 Dimensions of Learning rubric to talk about, at the end of this presentation, what they learned from the Global Council of Climate Leaders project. So the Global Council of Climate Leaders is a simulation. It's a class-wide and course-wide activity, meaning that everyone in the class participates in the simulation for the entire quarter. And what gets simulated in the council is committee work, the work of addressing problems by proposing solutions concretely. And so each student sits on the council as a fictitious representative from a city of their choosing. And each Thursday during class, we do council work. And this is either meeting as a full council or it's meeting with the 9 working groups that the council is made of. And when we began the term back in September, I told the class that they would be presenting their work in the Global Council of Climate Leaders simulation to the Drexel community on December 2nd as part of the Drexel Climate Year Speaker Series. And from that first week, I told the class that they were ultimately responsible for determining what their work would be, as well as the end of term deliverables. The reason for this, my insistence that students determine for themselves what their work would be, is that I think a fundamental problem with the climate crisis in particular is a lack of leadership and an inability to coordinate and to collaborate, among other things. But I think certainly many people would agree that a lack of leadership is a key problem that we face with the climate crisis. Too many of us don't know how to respond to climate change. And I think that one of the reasons we're left empty and unsure is because our education systems don't teach self-authority. They don't teach self-determination and often don't teach effective skills for working together. I think too often students are thrown into a group and asked to work together without being given the tools to do so effectively. And I myself am guilty of that. I think that that happened this quarter in this class, and it's something that I think many teachers are still learning how to do. Nevertheless, I think the simulation, the Global Council of Climate Leaders, effectively gave students the experience of what it's like to work together in a very large group with stakes on the table, namely presenting our work publicly at this event, and to build products, 3 artifacts that can be shared with the world. So what this class teaches, in addition to climate policy, social and political theory, and urban ethnography, is what it feels like to put yourself out there in a space of uncertainty and to make something of your own creation in this class and in community with others. And with that, I will turn it over to our facilitation working group, who will explain in greater detail how the council work is organized.
Hi, everyone. So at the start of the term, we were given a simple task as a class to individually pick a city to research the impacts of climate change on. This included studying the mitigation and adaptation techniques done by each city and its main actors. And we were to express our findings in a variety of methods, including answering questions, curating data visualizations, and identifying the core issues facing each city. We were given freedom from the restrictive guidelines, which allowed us to take the project in a direction that would naturally develop as our research portfolios became more detailed. We knew that this work was all leading up to a final project, but we had no idea what format it might take or how we'd go about creating it. In this class, we addressed these concerns and created several working groups as a result. The 3 artifacts in this presentation are the final results of these groups working individually and collaboratively. The next few slides show each working group, which the class members they're made up of, and which city each of those students chose to personally research.
Hi, everybody. All right, so facilitation was the group that Kate and I were both in, as well as Lily and Nick. And we would guide the council in meetings and directly in class on topics to consider throughout this whole process. We led the class and worked with other working groups in order to monitor their process as they created their artifacts. So the next group was documentation, and documentation took extensive notes during our meetings and they created a Notion page to compile the results of our project and the city information. The next group was education. Education developed ideas like a lesson plan to teach about climate change, and we'll be presenting that work that they did in form of one of the artifacts. Art activism was a group that looked at how art can be helpful and transformative on a cultural sense. They work to compare and document the art activism within each of the cities that we all looked at. Urban climate finance kept our council focused on reality. They worked with each group to come up with feasible ways to fund each project that we discussed and considered. Water infrastructure considered the impacts that climate change would have on water resources, urban infrastructure, and a variety of management practices. Food security observed the issues surrounding food resources in urban settings. They deduced that the main issue is food deserts and food availability. This group then worked on coming up with a plan to introduce regenerative farming methods that could be implemented within and around the city limits in order to counteract the food desert phenomenon. Coordination is our last group, and they looked at how climate change information and programs can be shared within the city communities that we researched. They looked at the stakeholders and the silent stakeholders of each city and suggested how to mobilize effective strategies to reach all members of the community equally.
So here is a map, which is a visualization of each class member's city across the world. So our analysis was done using cities on 5 of the 6 inhabited continents, and therefore it covers a wide range of geographical and social contexts. I'm now going to hand over to the first group, who's going to introduce you to the first artifacts that our class was created.
So the first class artifact was a podcast, and that was organized by the Water Infrastructure Working Group, composed of myself, Bryce Kester, and Mimi Fuchs, Harold Lanham, and Cindy D'Onofrio. But it includes the knowledge and the work from the entire class, basically. And Mimi and I just have the privilege of being able to present it today and talk about the process and the final product that was created. So the reason that we made our artifact into a podcast is that we realized that students had developed a diverse range of knowledge from over the course of the class, both as individuals focusing on their specific cities and also in their working groups, focusing on climate topics like education, food security, and art activism. And we wanted them to have an outlet to tell the stories that were important to them and not just leave that work potentially to stagnate in the classroom. So for that reason, we chose a product where students could distill a specific item that they had learned and share it publicly. And a podcast was a natural result of that because it's accessible to anyone with internet access and can convey a wide range of climate stories over audio. And, one of the reasons that we opened up the podcast to work outside of the Water Infrastructure Working Group was that one of the issues that we discussed in class was that we often focus on climate change and its interactions with compartmentalized urban infrastructures as separate items. And in that way, we might miss out on revolutionary approaches and organic approaches to systems thinking that would be based more organically on climate impacts and how they can cut across multiple infrastructures at once. Basically, as we talked about and read about in class on concepts like thinking like a climate is basically essentially boils down to the idea that we should rework our understanding of climate change to reflect its more boundary crossing and boundary moving nature. And for this reason, we wanted our artifacts to allow space for collaboration across working groups and for any individual to participate and not isolate our content just to water infrastructure. And in this way, we hope that our artifact reflects how we hope larger climate discussions take place, where they're more interdisciplinary, more collaborative, and have a place for both climate storytelling alongside climate data. And now I will pass it over to you.
Thanks, Bryce. Hi, guys. My name is Mimi, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the process and the final product we had with our podcast. So we started recording during week 9 of this past fall quarter. This allowed us to really reflect on a lot of the concepts we discussed in class and to be able to draw a little bit more from the course concepts in the final narratives we shared. We relied on Audacity audio software for mixing and editing. We also used freely available media from Pixabay to include some transition music and some sound effects. There's certainly an art to the technical side of podcasting, and we may not have perfected it, but we were at least able to make do to the extent that we could capture compelling narratives and then share them with a wider audience. So our final product ended up including 11 episodes with submissions from 18 different contributors. When discussing environmental policy, it's imperative to frame the conversation within the context of the relevant urban environment. So as was the practice for much of our coursework throughout this class, many of these episodes contain some sort of ethnography of the city before launching into a climate change related conversation. The initial lead from the Water Infrastructure Working Group led to a little over a third of these episodes focusing really on urban water issues in some way in cities from Lahore to London to Honolulu to Santiago. And so while we had some individual submissions that really focused on climate change issues in one city, we also had a variety of episodes that were a little bit more of a discussion, a comparison, and that allowed us to contrast some of these issues in a variety of urban environments. So we saw that with the episodes focusing on how we can finance climate policy initiatives, the different types of art activism we've seen in global cities around the world combating climate change. Some other folks also took a little bit more of a meta approach to this. There's a really wonderful episode from the coordination working group that essentially took a lot of different information from our class and was able to synthesize it and discuss how different cities saw their silent and major stakeholders when discussing climate action plans and climate policy. So I think something that I really loved is that, there's a lot of flexibility built into a podcast. And so each group was able to develop a narrative that spoke to something that they found compelling, meaningful, or important based on our coursework. And then we ultimately shared these both on our class Notion site that was developed by the documentation working group, as well as on SoundCloud where you can find them. We will share a link in this Zoom so you guys can have an easy way of finding that. When reflecting on the process of making this podcast, the first thing that I'll say is that it was really wonderful. As someone who was able to edit these, it was really incredible to see the wide range of knowledge that was shared by my fellow students. The other thing I would say is there's a lot of technical issues that can come up when you're recording a podcast. And so maybe if this is something that future students in this class would like to do, this could be an opportunity to collaborate with folks who are part of the Drexel community who have more expertise in media and technical work. Because this is a really important topic that I think a lot of people are really excited by. So maybe that's a future route of collaboration. So I really encourage you to check out these episodes. And I will hand it over to the Urban Farm Proposal Group. Thanks, guys.
Hi, hopefully you can hear me. My name is Ashley. Jen, I just want to say thank you for naming that we are on unceded Lenape land. But although you already did that, I'm going to do it again because I do believe in naming harm, even if we have to do that multiple times. So, as I said, we are unceded Lenape land. And also we'd like to name the fact that even more recently, Drexel University itself has fostered a culture of gentrification and exploitation that has pushed out many of the poor and Black communities in the area. We also would like to acknowledge that regenerative agriculture co-ops, repackages, renames, and therefore colonizes indigenous farming methods. To that end, as an act of reparations, all food produced on our fictional, just to make this very clear, farm is provided for free to the community with Black and indigenous people getting priority status. So to that end, my team consists of myself, Ashley, Sam, who will be speaking next, Medi, Marissa, and Uma. So our team framed our project around regenerative urban farming And regenerative farming has many definitions, but the common factor is that it focuses on taking a holistic approach to farming by structuring farming practice around the interconnectedness of natural systems. So what do I mean by that? When you're a kid in school or your parents are teaching you about nature and biology, they teach it to you in the most basic terms. And they probably talked about how things work in circles and cycles. For example, the circle of life. Death breeds life, life ends with death, so on and so forth. The same with trees capturing CO2. They turn that CO2 into oxygen, humans breathe in the oxygen, turn it into CO2, trees capture it again. So the natural world, when functioning without human intervention, works in cycles. Regenerative farming focuses on supporting and amplifying these cycles, principally by focusing on soil health. If you have healthy soil, then you have a healthy system. We accomplish this in many ways, one of which is by minimizing soil disturbances, so no heavy machinery, unlike traditional agriculture. We also keep roots in the soil for as long as possible, which stabilizes the soil and prevents erosion, and which we can accomplish, for example, by planting perennial shrubs and trees between crops. We also do this by increasing biodiversity, which increases the nutrients in the soil, which we can accomplish by planting several different crops, as opposed to single monoculture crops, which is how industrial agriculture. And we also do this by taking advantage of the natural benefits farm animals provide when allowed to graze on the farmland, such as using their manure to fertilize crops instead of relying on industrial and potentially dangerous fertilizers. So how does this relate to the climate crisis? Well, when we use these methods, we can, one, capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. Two, increase the land's ability to retain water, preventing flooding and erosion. Three, increase soil fertility. Four, improve the water cycle. Five, increase biodiversity. And six, reintroduce native plants to their native environment. This is only a small amount of benefits that regenerative agriculture can have on a system. All of this helps to decrease the harmful effects that the climate crisis has caused. Next, you'll be hearing from Sam.
Hey guys. So I'm a part of the food security working group here in our global council committee. And I chose this group because I believe that food is a basic human right and I want to help promote access for all. My working group worked together all term to throwing out ideas of what we wanted to do for the food working group. And we decided upon creating a fictional urban regenerative farm here on Drexel's campus. And we chose the name Cultivating the Future. So as you can see here, these are our blueprints that we made for the farm. And the mission of our farm is pretty simple. We aim to provide fresh produce for our community in West Philadelphia and all over the city to combat food security, as well as promote regenerative farming practices. We created a Notion website that goes into a little bit more detail about what our mission is and how we aim to help the community, all while treating the earth with respect and love. This website includes our podcast episode on regenerative farming, and it goes into a little bit more about that. And you should check it out. So thank you for your time, and I hope that we can cultivate a great future together.
Hi, everybody. My name is Rachel, and I will be presenting on behalf of the education group. Our presentation will feature a lesson plan on Notion about the benefits of art activism in climate education. The members of the education group are Stephen and Dylan, and the members of the art activism group are Leah, Nicole, and myself. So to begin, how does art impact climate change? Starting with education. Education is a tool in which cultural change takes place. And so in order for climate education to occur, public education on the implications of climate impacts will be paramount. So how do we successfully educate the public about climate change? We must make climate matter to the people we are trying to reach. So for us, climate education then not only needs to be universally acceptable, but appealing to audiences of all ages and backgrounds. Through climate education lesson plans and hands-on activities, this is exactly what the education committee aims to do. So this is the introduction, our lesson plan. So when you go on our Notion page, this is, I believe the first box that you can click on is the lesson plan. So first you will see, so why do we need art? And this is just a little explanation about why do we need art in climate change activism. And it will always contain a paragraph about the background for the lesson. Typically, it will explain how the lesson plan is related to climate change and why it is important to learn about it. If possible, it will include some vocabulary words as well as things that are worth mentioning, which will be bolded and underlined to signify their importance. The next section will be our Take Action section. This section serves as a preface to the actual activity. It is like a description, like the first section, and any information regarding it will be below it. And then it actually includes what the actual activity will be. And the next will be supplies. So if it is art related, you will see supplies there that, especially if you're working with younger children, what you may need. And in the example we have in the PowerPoint, the medium is just like paper and cardboard and clay and similar things like that. So next is our DIY activism section. This section is just thinking points of what you would like to do in the project or encourage your students, if you're a teacher, to do in this activism project that you are looking to make. We really encourage you to think about how you want to go about your piece and how you want to how your viewers want to feel about your piece, especially. And then also, it is very important to notice step two. Step two is our key art activism feature in this lesson plan. And we encourage you to look at inspiration. So this is when you pick out of the lesson plan and you can look around our Notion page with examples of art activism all around the world. And on our Notion page, there are 19 cities that feature climate artwork for inspiration. For this section, the Art Activism Committee asked the class to submit write-ups about the climate art scene in their city. They were all edited by education group member Stephen, and they're very interesting to look at. They're really good, and they include a lot of different mediums of art as well. So the example that I'm gonna present is Chicago, Illinois, which is actually the city I focused on and worked on. And in this example, you can see we have two paintings that were done. In the first example, it actually features a McDonald's on the water in Chicago. It might be a little small on your end, but it's in the very back of the picture, and it just features how flooding affects Chicago neighborhoods. And then the second picture, which is a little different from the first, or extremely different, features all different aspects of climate change, including environmental racism. So as you can see, climate art activism can attack many points just besides art in general. And in this picture, we can see two children that are featured from two different parts of Chicago that live two different lives. And you can see protesters around the air and pollution in the south side of Chicago as well. And then in each section, we have the write-ups about our activism. In some sections, our activism committee actually did a larger write-up, and then others we just had student write-ups from the class.
And then finally, we have the lesson plan discussion. You can figure out what kind of art activism speaks to you after you look at all the pieces. Like I said, we power a lot of different young speakers, and you just have to think about them, what you want to create in your lesson about art activism, or with the students or whoever that is using this will create. And yeah, we finally just encourage a discussion after the creation of this activity, and really how you felt, and maybe what will inspire after this is completed. Thank you.
All right, it's me again. So our closing remarks on using the 6 dimensions of learning. Let me get to this slide. Okay. So as you'll remember, Dr. Kenner said that we are going to be using the 6 dimensions of learning to kind of connect all of our artifacts together. So the first dimension of learning is creativity and originality and imagination. So we worked on this project for the majority of the semester, and we have had to use all 3 of these things every day, basically. From forming working groups to taking on the responsibility of researching a city, we were granted the freedom to choose whatever we wanted to do. And within this freedom, it was very difficult at times. Most of us had never had the course open to us to be able to choose what we wanted to work on. But as you see from all the artifacts that we all wrote to that challenge. So the next dimension is, oh, someone got an email, is ethical and inclusive design and innovation. And as a member of the facilitation committee, we needed to use this dimension when organizing meetings. Our documentation group also had to use this dimension in order to design and order, in order to how they were recording and how they were reporting all of our council notes as a whole, so that we are all on the same page. As a whole class, we use the ethical and inclusive design when constructing our 3 artifacts. Each group had to work on a different project, which all required unique and innovative organizational design. So the next category is knowledge and understanding. And while the class mainly focuses on the Climate Council, we also spent a lot of time discussing and learning about cities and the impacts that climate change will have on these areas. The main lens that we gained was offered from the book Thinking Like a Climate by Hannah Knox. This book explores how areas of climate change but also through an anthropology lens. We found that as a class, sometimes climate change is too big of a problem and is intimidating and disheartening. But through Knox's lens, we also learned that there needs to be a cultural shift and to counteract climate change impacts. And so many of the artifacts were guided by this idea. Skills and strategies that we learned and enriched were effective communication, cooperative group work, and novel technologies. We learned how to run a meeting and contribute to meetings. In the working groups, we demonstrated how to work in a group and produce an artifact. And many of our classmates had to learn how to make a podcast and a Notion page, which are new technology avenues for all of us. We all used our prior and emerging experiences to complete this course and these projects. We all brought different skills to the table. By dividing the class into working groups, we saw everyone thrive. Giving each individual the opportunity to share their experience, whether this was through the city that they chose, the working group that they were in, or the roles in the artifact projects, we all benefited from each individual's prior experience. And lastly, confidence and independence was a keystone dimension to this class. While it was important to learn and to design and to be creative, none of those things would have been possible if we just didn't show up. And I don't mean coming to class on time. I mean being present and contributing. That may seem like an easy task, but this project is intimidating. It was a big task to take on. As we worked together more and more, every week, every student shared their strengths, and together our collective confidence grew. As we started to develop the idea for our artifacts and the presentation here, every group had a job and we completed the journey together. So this is our class picture we took, and now it's time to ask questions. So I'll open it up and have our classmates come up.
And everyone, please feel free to use the hand raise function or to put your questions in the chat. And Corinne and I can help facilitate that.
So while we're setting up here, I'm going to stop the screen share, and I'm also going to put the link to this class website that the council created so that you can all take a look at the work that students put together as we have our discussion here. Where's Kira? Kira, this is ready to go, yeah? Great. And just huge shout out to the documentation team. No members of the documentation team were actually speaking during the presentation, but they anchored putting together the website that we're going to share with you here. Okay, so we have an incredible team of students here to answer questions. We have Kelly, Harold, Marissa, Stephen, Rachel, and Nick. And I'm going to see if we can move this a little bit here so that you can see our panel of students. Yeah, maybe Nick, if you slide back a little bit. Yeah, terrific. And so as you ask questions, the students will pop up here to the podium, which I'm standing behind to answer the question. And so Jen, you'll moderate the Q&A? Right.
Yep.
Terrific. I'm going to sit over there.
Do we have a first question? Jay has a question in the chat. Excellent presentation, Jay says. Thank you, Jay. Thank you for saying that. I know you're not thanking me. Was wondering if the artifacts created during this project will be available to access.
Yes, the artifacts will be available to access. The podcast and everything. There's a notion page set up, which I believe will be shared, if that's the plan. Yeah, so the podcast itself we can share separately, but mainly there's going to be a notion page, which will have everything compiled, and that'll be the way that we share it. And I'm not really sure how we're going to be doing that. Is it going to be a link, or is it on the page already? Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, and we're gonna be sharing the recording of this presentation on the Climate and Sustainability website. And so we'll be sure to link to the students' website from there. So it'll be findable from a couple of different directions.
That will be very nice, because this documentation provides a lot of insights, a lot of good insights, and it shows what a good collaboration can be among students from a variety of different perspectives.
Christian?
Yeah, so I was wondering what advice you might have for faculty who might want to use this kind of pedagogy in their classes? Are there things to avoid, things to do that, you know, that someone would definitely need to kind of bring in early? Any sorts of thoughts along those lines for the group?
Thanks, Christian.
I guess I'll start since Harold started this trend of coming up. So I guess the thing I would say, if we're running this critical pedagogy, the advice that we would have for faculty members is to kind of keep a loose leash, I would say. We were still given freedom from guidelines to a very big extent, but as my other facilitation group members have mentioned, that can come with a lot of difficulties. It can come with a lot of ideas piling in at once. And to coalesce all of them together, we still do need the advice of faculty every now and then to make sense of what we should be doing given the time constraints of the presentation so far. So that's all I would say, at least for running this critical pedagogy.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, sort of paying attention to the mix of freedom and to explore, and supervision and guidance, and being available for feedback along those lines.
And it also did help that we were kind of trained to an extent in facilitation first, because then from there we can kind of act somewhat as leaders while everyone's still equal in the class. We can kind of guide some projects, track progress, and then also help groups interact with one another. And then on projects like podcasts, we also saw various students taking the lead, like Yumi.
I just really quickly want to do that. While speaking to the loose teaching, having individual working groups throughout the entire term gave us each our own lens to frame climate change for the entire term. So like I was in the education working group, and in the education working group, every single thing that I did, even though we had like the loose like common thread of like a common meeting, I was looking at everything through the lens of education, whereas like someone in the infrastructure group or the water infrastructure group would be looking at it through that as well as our own individual cities. So it was like a fun way to like not just have everything tied into like here's like the right answer, yes, this is what is correct. It was no like everybody had something to say that really added to the conversation that we would eventually beat back up on Tuesdays, and I would learn a lot from everybody else and not just the professor. Yeah. I totally agree.
And if I'm just to add one more thing based on what Stephen said, I would also like to note that all of the groups that we mentioned were very fluid. Some of the ones that we presented so far were not groups originally. And some of the other groups, like the infrastructure group, then turned into the water infrastructure group, because they found that that's where their research was really heading towards. So we still had that freedom within the group to an extent.
Great, thanks.
We have a, thank you. We have a question in chat from Morgan. Thanks, Morgan. I'm wondering how students chose their cities, and what were your methods for researching a specific city or climate change subtopic? How did you determine which information was most reliable or relevant? I can read that again if you need me to.
Hello, my name is Kelly, and to answer that, we were presented with the idea of choosing cities from like week one. So it could, anyone had like free reign on deciding what city they wanted to do. I know for me, I chose the city of Accra, Ghana, because that's where my parents are from. So I wanted to learn more about that. Some people chose where they were born. Some people chose areas that they wanted to visit. So it was kind of like up to you what you wanted to do and what you wanted to choose in terms of methods for researching a specific city and climate change subtopic. We were given assignments throughout the term that related to our cities and kind of gave us prompts and guidelines. Specifically, I remember the city questions, assignment that had various categories surrounding information around the city. So demographics, what's the infrastructure like in there in your city, and you could have in your research, like how it was mentioned for the larger global climate group, infrastructure group, when they did their working group,
they started out as just general infrastructure and then headed towards water infrastructure because that's what they were seeing. That same thing could have happened when an individual was studying a city. We also had a core issues report assignment where taking information from everything that we learned with our city questions, we had to analyze what we thought were the emerging issues in our cities. So that also gave further specification for someone studying a city to be like, oh, well, at least I can say for me for Accra, as I was researching, I saw two major things come up with the sea level rise and poor water and sanitation management in the city. So after that research, that's what became like my kind of focus and I guess climate subtopic for that city for the rest of the term. So I believe like similar things happened for the other students in the class. And then determining which information was most reliable or relevant. Again, we were encouraged to use a variety of sources, relying on the information and the readings that Professor Kenner gave us, but also doing our own research with the databases that we're familiar with. And I also know for me, initially I was not necessarily relying completely on scholarly resources because I wanted to know how locals felt and how locals thought about those issues as well. So we kind of had, like again, that loose leash to explore different avenues of research and whatnot. So that's all I have to say.
Great. Thanks. Was anybody going to add to that?
Yeah. So yeah, my city was Chicago, and just kind of echoing what Kelly said. It was mainly just on personal choice. I'm from Philadelphia, born and raised, but the only restriction we had was Ellie City was Philadelphia, so that would be my second choice. But I had to pick somewhere where I wanted to visit, so I picked Chicago, and I learned so much about it. And again, like Kelly said, the topic I originally found very interesting was the infrastructure. As a political science student, the current infrastructure bill that is trying to get passed countrywide was pertinent to Chicago, especially with their education and paving infrastructure. But then once I got onto our activism group and chose to be on that group, I focused a lot on our activism, and it worked both ways because our activism and the infrastructure in my city worked together, especially with flooding. And in the presentation, there was a painting on the flooding in Chicago. So that's how I shaped my research in this project.
Awesome, thank you. I think we can move to the next question from Andrew. Sort of a two different questions. How did you choose to format the podcast? Was it scripted or ad-libbed? And then part two of the question, also, do you think critical pedagogy as a framework for college courses gave you a new understanding of climate change that you would not have received from a standard lecture format? Thanks, Andrew. So one question, sort of how you sort of made decisions about the podcast, and the second about your experience with this type of learning.
So for the podcast part of it, each group came up with their own thing, and I believe there was a little bit of ad-libbing, but it was also written out that way, so it's cohesive and fit within an actual framework that makes sense and people can actually follow. And for the second question, I do think that critical pedagogy really does help because we were able to explore our own topics, really looking at things that we wanted to, relative to like learning from what someone else thinks is important for us to learn. And because of that, I think it really allows us, or allowed me anyway, to look at things that I wanted to read into that I might not have done otherwise. And I do think it helps me deepen my knowledge.
I just wanted to add on to that because there were multiple times very quickly that Professor Kenner asked us, like, what are we interested in? What do we want to learn? What readings should we look for? And what topics like should we discuss as a class? And I think that was very helpful because, again, it seemed like we had direct influence on how the course was going, and it wasn't just what a professor thought was best for us to learn. And I really enjoyed that. And that came in the form of her asking us, and then we also had a Google form to fill out at some point in the term too.
To answer the second question, I'm an environmental science major, so most of my classes are just pure science. That's what most of the requirements are. We don't really talk about the human element at times unless it comes to climate change. So I really liked that this class allowed us to think more creatively, because I really didn't think that was an option. And then we started reading a book for the class, which was Thinking Like a Climate. And this was sort of rearranging the way that we think about climate change. And it's sort of about having a cultural shift and how that's just as important as, making changes and adapting. So that's something that I'm a senior and I never heard anyone talk about that in any of my classes previously. And I think that was a really interesting perspective because, I don't think there's a couple of different majors in this class and not everyone gets, the more sociological kind of learning. And I think just having us learn about so many different parts of our city that really helped. Also like art activism, that's something I never knew people did in relation to climate change. And then I found out there's a ton of way that people can convey their worries about the climate, like through paintings or dance or other forms of art. And I found that really interesting.
Cool. I think looks like we can go on to the next question from Hugh. In doing your research and potentially getting a better understanding of the unique perspectives of your city's challenges and available resources, do you have any thoughts on the challenges and potential opportunities of negotiating a global climate agreement like the UNFCCC process? I am not familiar with what that process is. Students, I don't know if you probably know more about that than me. Can somebody just give us a quick explainer? Oh, okay, Hugh. Sorry, I just meant the UN climate conference process. Thanks, Hugh. So sort of looking for insights about sort of what you all sort of came to in terms of thinking about international negotiations.
Hi, I'm not one of the people sitting there, but I can answer the question. So in Dr. Kenner's framing of this class, we want to speak about this book again, but it really highlights how, when we think of the climate crisis from a human perspective, we have to tackle the issue locally, and things need to be tailored for the localities that they're in, right? So I think it, in my opinion, becomes a little difficult with these global agreements to really get to the crux of that. And I also would like to speak to the fact that we live in a capitalist society, and there is absolutely no way, in my personal opinion, that we're ever going to come to a global agreement on how to tackle the climate crisis when the people who are leading the agreements are the ones making the most money and who cause the most harm. And I think we saw a lot of people speaking to that fact at COP26. The global South are the people experiencing the worst effects currently. And the global North continues to push their deadlines further back. And I just personally, I don't think that the right way to do this is on a global perspective. I think that nations should embolden their citizens to handle it locally, but that's my opinion.
Thank you for that. Oh, we've got another piece of that. Okay.
If I were to add on her point about the deficiencies, I would say with the global agreement type of plan is that even the extent of the agreement itself, is if there is one, can be questioned in a lot of ways, because if America is signing on to agreement, what does that mean for the Native Americans? Does that mean that they're signing on too? And then along with my city, which is Venice, which I chose to research, Venice has their own culture, they have their own language. But if Italy signs on to the agreement, does that mean that they're being represented in that agreement? And the same could be said of Catalonia and Spain, who also have their own language and culture. So there are a lot of these questions about what the viability of a global agreement actually is, if it is to be accomplished in the first place. So I guess I would agree with my classmates' intuition to say that it itself is kind of a flawed strategy in trying to tackle climate change.
Great, thank you. We've got another question from Morgan. Thank you, Morgan. I really love the regenerative farming plan. I'm wondering if members of that working group have considered how to acquire vacant lots in West Philly. And ideally, who would these lots be owned by once acquired, if at all? Who would decide how the land is organized and maintained?
So I was in the urban farm working group. Originally, we kind of looked at a website and it had all the vacant lots in Philly that were available, I guess. I think Drexel maybe had purchased one, something I can't remember. But yeah, there is like a method to buy them. It is very complicated as well. There's a lot of rules. They don't make it easy to really just buy land and create a farm. But, you know, with our idea, it was that it would be pretty much community run. Like we had part of the farm layout was having a space for the community. I think that's the most important, is having the people who need access to fresh food, like having them be in charge of it and having it be their farm and just helping them out along the way. Like this is their project and we're just here to like assist and help them in any way we can. And we've seen that in West Philly as well, and just other parts of Philly. There are quite a few urban farms, even just like on little tiny blocks or bigger than that. And I think a lot of them are really great at organizing the community and having people come together. So.
Thanks. Anything else that students you want to add to that question? We can move on. Does anybody else have any other questions? I actually have one, sort of pretty open-ended one. This has been such a fascinating presentation for the students in the course. I wonder if you were surprised by anything, whether by the way Professor Kenner ran the course, by what you learned from your fellow students about climate change. What surprised you?
So I can answer that a little bit. There was a lot that surprised me in this course. So I came into this course having a very, very baseline knowledge of climate change. So the first thing that I would say is like, this course made it so painfully obvious how climate change is impacting every single thing that we do and how we think about everything. You can, in my opinion, you can relate any problem pretty much in our country, at least, to climate change in some way. And in that way, like we spoke a little bit about a just transition. So like if you wanted to speak to like wealth inequality or something like that, you can frame that in the lens of climate change and solve two problems with, you know, one solution essentially. On top of that, I think that the other surprising thing was the learning record, going back to how the classes run itself. Dr. Kenner did a great job of just outlining what needed to be done and just giving us the freedom to do it. And that's something I've never had in any of my classes before. And that was a lot of fun. like going to class was not something that I dreaded, even though it was from 4:30 to 6 o'clock, because I got to come in and like actually learn from not just a professor in a lecture, but from just a conversation with any student in this class. Because everybody, like I said earlier, had something new to bring, because everybody's learning about different things within the same overarching topic. So yeah, I think the entire course itself is like a breath of fresh air in a way, where like not just on the topic, but kind of combining like the environmental science students with the political science students. Everyone had a new perspective. And that was probably the best thing that came out of this class and the most surprising.
So it's kind of interesting because I would say initially, like everything that you just said, I was like, no, I'm so used to, you know, a professor like lecturing and having papers and other deliverables, like short assignments. So like going over the syllabus and then that first day of class when we were talking about the learning record, I was not enthusiastic about it. I was actually kind of scared and sad about it because like that whole loose leash and not having and there's so much freedom, like I'm not usually good with that. I like instructions. And even though there were instructions, like the instructions were there, but it's also like, you can do what you want to. But how do I know what if I'm doing is right? And I think that that's something that I learned throughout this entire quarter, that there's not necessarily right and wrong, especially with like how you're learning and the processes that you develop to learn what you are. And that's something that I greatly appreciate because man, I feel like I was struggling a little bit in the beginning of this course because of the setup and the nature. But I do kind of enjoy the learning record now. I feel like I can give it some props. Like it works, like you do learn a lot. And I really like the emphasis that this course had in bringing like prior, like one of the learning record dimensions is use of prior and emerging experiences. Because I feel like I was able to do that here in this classroom and then connect things from my other standard lectures and classes. And I went abroad for 1 week, and when I was there, the entire time I was thinking about this course and connecting everything. So I don't know if I could have said the same if it was just a traditional lecture course. So I definitely came around full circle, but like I was not with it in the beginning. But yeah.
I get you. Truly, that would terrify me too as a student. Any other feedback on that question? And are there any other questions from our audience? Going once?
Jennifer, I have one question.
Great, Jay.
I'm really very happy to be here today and listening to all you speak and share your experiences. I was wondering, what is your vision of what is your next step having done this? Meaning, how would you encourage, maybe inspire others to think about climate change, partner, share your thoughts, ideas, any vision that you have on this?
I hope that, I don't know if this directly answers the question, but like the next step is just kind of spreading the word as individuals. Like, so I mean, our course after this presentation is over, so we all go our separate ways. But in that sense, like, I know in my mind, like I was like the guy in my friend group that was going after class, and like anytime someone would like try and drop something on the ground or something like that, like I was just going on rants about climate change, and like it's about spreading the word. And then through the lens of education, something that unfortunately we didn't have the time to look at in the education group, but something I wanted to do was to sort of look at things through like a PR lens, and really localize advertisements to people who like maybe don't care about climate change or climate deniers or something like that. Just to, it's about finding a way to make people think that climate change matters to them specifically. So I think I don't love the idea of having an individualistic response to such a global problem. But at the end of the day, in order for us to see action that is noticeable to us in our communities, you are going to have to individualize the topic to the citizens within a community. And I think that the next step in regards to that is to figure out what exactly is happening where, and then to act on that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I'll add here that, so I think in terms of the model of this class, Cities and Climate Change, The course website is publicly available, as is the Global Council of Climate Leaders Project. So, you know, that is something, and it has all of the lesson plans, all of the readings, discussion questions, everything is in there, the learning records. So hopefully other instructors can just take this course and, you know, take bits and pieces from it. I'm also going to be writing up something of a digital how-to that walks instructors through how to run this course, or courses similar to it. And that's something I've begun writing up, and I'm imagining either self-publishing it or just publishing it on Notion. In terms of climate education, so this class is going to run every fall. So in the past, we've had folks from other colleges here at Drexel co-teach it with me. So that's also a possibility in the future. As far as climate education, Richard Johnson, who's part of the Climate Year Speaker Series Committee, he's run a couple of simulations in the city of Philadelphia that have done this kind of education. And I learned from Richard Johnson how to do climate change education years ago. So he's a great person who continues to do work. And then finally, there is going to be a global climate change teach-in happening in universities all over the world this spring. And I'm hoping that Drexel will participate in it, and the Climate Year Speaker Series folks are either, you know, already participating, or we can talk more about that. Yeah.
Sounds great. And I also want to point out that through our libraries, our students can access number of our books, articles, newspaper articles about climate change, about sustainability. And we are in the process of putting together a website on sustainability, which includes some of this. And I'll share with you as soon as that website is ready. It's almost done. I think they are going to launch it anytime, maybe. So I think this would be a great resource for students to refer to, even faculty members, and would love to have your suggestions in terms of anything that we could add in that resource. We will certainly hope to link to your resource, your website, as well as projects from that page.
That sounds great.
Thank you. Thank you so much for an insightful talk and your experiences.
Just a comment from Kyla in chat, not a question, just a comment. The great presentation and project, everyone. I've been scanning through the website from the link Dr. Kenner shared and looking at the artwork from each city. It's awesome to have this small collection of international climate related art. Looking forward to listening to the podcast too. Yeah, same. So I think we can probably begin to wrap it up. I want to thank Ellie and the class for a really cool presentation. This has been such a thrill to see the work that you've done for this term, and I am hoping that we see more of this kind of class project that we can help share out to the Drexel community. I want to give a heads up to anybody here who's a student. Our climate and sustainability team is cooking up a couple of case competitions for the spring and summer terms that I want to let you know about. If you are musical or you are in a band, know that in the spring term, we have a songwriting competition coming up. More details on that soon, but we're planning it now, it will include a songwriting workshop with a very special, pretty cool guest. And then in the summer, if you are somebody who really enjoys data, we're gonna have a data-focused case competition. We're working with Professor Gwen Ottinger, who has data about oil refinery fence line air quality and the EPA's kind of metrics are kind of useless for the communities who live near them. So we're going to be challenging students to make a metric that communities can use to understand what's going on in their air quality. So stay tuned for that, for those. We hope that you'll keep an eye out. We'll be sharing information about both of those through various channels through Drexel. Corinne, is there anything else I'm forgetting? I know I want everybody to know that Water Year is coming. I already mentioned that. So please consider how you might want to connect with us through Water Year. We are totally happy to share your projects and ideas that have to do with water and climate coming up. Sorry, Corinne, anything else that we want to share right now, or anything else anybody else wants to share about stuff coming up?
Hi. Before we go, if you were interested in the farming perspective, especially, I just want to acknowledge that there's a lot of this work already happening in Philadelphia and throughout the world, especially. And it's mostly being done by marginalized people. Black and Indigenous people are already leading this fight in Philadelphia. So if you are like super interested in that, on the Notion site for our team, we have other resources and we've listed a lot of the organizations there. So I definitely encourage you to give that a look and volunteer your time and even more so your money for these people, especially if you are white, as an act of reparations. That's it for me.
Any other shareables that anybody wants to get out there about upcoming programs? Okay. I want to thank everybody. I especially want to thank you, Ellie, and your class. Man, this is really one of my favorite Climate Year Speaker Series episodes. Thanks for inspiring us in this way. Thank you, everybody, for coming and for your questions. And please stay in touch with us. Have a happy and safe winter break coming up. And before that, a successful finals week.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you for everyone who came to this event.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye, all.